The year is 1968. The Vietnam War rages, social change sweeps across the world. Jet air travel represents a new era, whisking people across continents with speed and ease. But a dark side lurked beneath the glamour of this modern marvel. The skies were no longer a sanctuary. A chilling new phenomenon was emerging: hijacking. Armed with weapons and fueled by desperation or ideology, these individuals held the fate of passengers and crew hostage. This is the story of that fateful day when terror took to the skies, forever changing the face of aviation. The sleek Boeing 707, a symbol of modern travel, stood ready at JFK Airport. Passengers, a mix of families on vacation, business travelers, and those returning home, boarded with anticipation. They settled into their seats, unaware that danger lurked among them. 4 men, their faces betraying nothing of the turmoil within, boarded the plane with a purpose far different from the other passengers. Luis Armando Peña Soltren, a Cuban exile fueled by a longing for his homeland, led the group. They carried with them not only their personal baggage but also a dangerous secret weapons concealed beneath their clothing. The journey that began with such hope and promise was about to take a terrifying turn. The wheels of the Pan Am Boeing 707 lifted off the runway at JFK, carrying with them the dreams and aspirations of over 100 souls. Families embarking on long-awaited vacations, businessmen chasing deals, and students returning home for the holidays all shared the common thread of anticipation for the journey ahead. The air buzzed with a gentle hum of conversation. The aroma of coffee and the rustle of newspapers filled the cabin. Children, their eyes wide with wonder, gazed out the windows at the shrinking cityscape below. Life, for those fleeting moments, seemed suspended in a bubble of hope and excitement. But unbeknownst to those on board, a sinister plan was already in motion. Scattered among the unsuspecting passengers, the 4 hijackers maintained a low profile. Outwardly, they appeared no different from the others, men traveling for business or pleasure. But beneath their calm exteriors, a current of tension ran deep. Luis Armando Peña Soltren, the driving force behind the hijacking, sat quietly, his gaze distant. His thoughts drifted back to his homeland, Cuba, a place he had been forced to flee years earlier. The weight of their secret pressed down on them, a heavy burden they carried with each passing moment. As the plane soared higher, reaching its cruising altitude, a palpable shift occurred within the cabin. The initial excitement of takeoff had given way to a sense of routine. Passengers settled into their books, engaged in quiet conversations, or simply closed their eyes, lulled by the gentle hum of the engines. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, a subtle tension simmered. The flight attendants, their senses attuned to the nuances of passenger behavior, couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Time, once a comforting constant, now seemed to warp and distort. "30 minutes into the flight, as the sun cast golden rays on the wings of the Boeing 707, the hijackers decided to act. Their movements were swift, calculated, rehearsed in the dark recesses of their minds. Luis Armando Peña Soltren, his face hardened with resolve, rose from his seat. His hand, moving with practiced ease, reached beneath his jacket, emerging with a glint of cold steel. The sight of the gun, a stark intrusion in the tranquil setting, sent a jolt of fear through the nearby passengers. Their objective was clear: take control of the cockpit, seize command of the aircraft, and redirect it to their chosen destination. The initial shock of seeing the weapons quickly gave way to raw, unadulterated panic. Gasps of horror filled the air as the gravity of the situation dawned on the passengers. Whispers laced with fear and uncertainty rippled through the cabin. Hijackers! The word spread like wildfire, igniting a maelstrom of terror. Mothers clutched their children tightly, their faces pale with fear. The flight attendants, trained for emergencies but never expecting this, struggled to maintain order. The hijackers, their faces grim, barked orders, their voices amplified by the fear that permeated the air. A cockpit under siege. The pilots face a deadly choice. Luis Armando Peña Soltren, his gun held steady, approached the cockpit door. His eyes, cold and calculating, met those of a terrified flight attendant. With a curt nod, he indicated his intention. The flight attendant, her heart pounding in her chest, raised a trembling hand and knocked on the cockpit door. Inside the cockpit, the pilots, oblivious to the terror unfolding in the cabin, exchanged puzzled glances. The door opened a crack, and the flight attendant, her voice barely a whisper, informed the pilots of the hijacking. The pilots, their faces etched with disbelief, were suddenly thrust into a nightmare scenario. Silence descends, a captive audience in fear. An eerie silence descended upon the cabin, punctuated only by the muffled sobs of frightened passengers and the rustle of the hijackers' movements. The initial shock had given way to a chilling realization. They were trapped, hostages in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. The air, once filled with the anticipation of a routine flight, now crackled with tension. Every cough, every creak of the plane's interior amplified the sense of vulnerability. The passengers, stripped of their freedom and their sense of security, could only obey. Whispers of hope, murmurs of despair. As the initial shock began to wear off, a strange dichotomy emerged within the confined space of the cabin. Whispers of hope, fueled by prayers and a belief in miracles, intertwined with murmurs of despair. Families huddled together, seeking solace in their shared fear. Couples held hands tightly, their grip a silent testament to their love and a shared hope for survival. The air was thick with unspoken prayers, a collective plea for deliverance from the nightmare that had enveloped them. Time, once a reliable constant, now seemed to warp and distort under the oppressive weight of the hostage situation. Seconds stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock an agonizing reminder of their captivity. The hijackers, their initial nervousness replaced by a grim determination, maintained their vigil. They paced the aisles, their eyes constantly scanning the passengers, their fingers never straying far from their weapons. The passengers, their movements restricted, their voices silenced, had no choice but to endure the agonizing weight. The plane, a metal cocoon hurtling through the vast emptiness of the sky, became a microcosm of their collective fear. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere crackled with a tension far exceeding the hum of the Boeing 707's engines. Captain Robert Miller, a veteran pilot with years of experience, fought to maintain his composure as Luis Armando Peña Soltren, his gun unwavering, issued his demands. Havana, Cuba. The co-pilot, his face pale but resolute, meticulously adjusted the aircraft's course, his every move scrutinized by the armed hijacker. The weight of responsibility for the lives of over 100 souls pressed heavily upon their shoulders. They were trained professionals bound by duty and a deep-seated instinct to protect their passengers. They would comply for now, but they would also look for any opportunity, however slim, to regain control of the situation. Their opportunity arose in the form of routine communication with air traffic control. The hijackers, confident in their control, saw no threat in this seemingly mundane exchange. But for the pilots, it represented a lifeline, a chance to send out a desperate plea for help without arousing suspicion. With a calmness that belied the turmoil within, Captain Miller relayed their new course, his voice steady, his words measured. But hidden within the seemingly routine transmission, a code word, a subtle deviation from protocol, alerted the air traffic controllers on the ground that something was terribly wrong. The knowledge that their message had been received, that help was being mobilized, provided a much-needed surge of hope to the trapped crew. With each passing mile, the tension within the cockpit ratcheted up a notch. The hijackers, growing increasingly agitated, scrutinized the pilots' every move. The pilots maintained a facade of calm compliance. They followed orders precisely, their voices betraying no fear. Their best chance of survival lay in biding their time. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the clouds. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A breathtaking spectacle contrasted the terror gripping Pan Am Flight 281. Havana, the hijackers' destination, loomed large, shrouded in mystery and trepidation. The plane began its descent, a dark shadow against the twilight sky. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated, a stark reminder of their captivity. Inside the cabin, a palpable tension hung in the air. Some stared out the windows, searching for clues in this unfamiliar land. The wheels of the Boeing 707 kissed the tarmac with a screech, the sound amplified in the stillness of the Havana night. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. They had landed, but their ordeal was far from over. The uncertainty of their fate now magnified tenfold. Outside, the unfamiliar landscape of Cuba unfolded. Armed guards, their faces grim, surrounded the plane. The air crackled with tension. Inside, the hijackers barked orders. They had achieved their objective, but the true test lay ahead. A mixed reception, relief, and apprehension. The cabin door swung open, a rush of humid Havana air flooding the interior, carrying with it the sounds of a city awakening. Luis Armando Peña Soltren, his face a mask of determination, led his fellow hijackers off the plane, their steps hesitant yet resolute as they stepped onto Cuban soil. A mix of Cuban officials and armed soldiers greeted them, their expressions unreadable. Were these men heroes? Revolutionaries returning to their homeland after years of exile? Or were they criminals, hijackers who had committed a brazen act of air piracy? The answer, it seemed, was not so simple. For the passengers and crew, the disembarkation was a chaotic affair. Herded like cattle, their movements scrutinized, they were ushered into a waiting area, a sterile, brightly lit space that did little to calm their frayed nerves. The faces around them reflected a kaleidoscope of emotions: fear, relief, confusion, exhaustion. The weight of their ordeal pressed down on them, the memories of the hijacking still fresh, the fear still palpable. They were safe for now, but their ordeal was far from over. They were strangers in a strange land, pawns in a political game they did not understand, their fates hanging precariously in the balance. A hero's welcome, a new reality sets in. The hijackers, emboldened by their apparent success, anticipated a hero's welcome in Havana. They envisioned open arms, praise for their daring act of defiance against the United States. But the reality that greeted them was far more complex, a tangled web of political maneuvering and shifting allegiances. While Fidel Castro's government had publicly condemned hijackings, the arrival of these men, Cuban exiles who had risked everything to return to their homeland, presented a unique dilemma. The Cuban government, eager to exploit any opportunity to embarrass the United States, found itself in a delicate position. The hijackers, initially hailed as heroes by some segments of the Cuban population, soon realized that their freedom came at a price. They were not granted the unconditional embrace they had envisioned. Instead, they found themselves caught in a web of suspicion and surveillance, their movements restricted, their lives subject to the whims of the Cuban government. The passengers and crew of Flight 281, meanwhile, became pawns in this high-stakes political game. Held for several days in a Havana hotel, their movements monitored, their contact with the outside world limited, they experienced firsthand the complexities of Cold War politics. They were caught in a tug-of-war between two superpowers, their fates hanging precariously in the balance. The long shadow of justice, surrender, and reckoning. The hijackers' dreams of a triumphant return to Cuba faded from the headlines. Some integrated into Cuban society, carrying their past in silence. Others sought ways to escape the island. Luis Armando Peña Soltren remained in Cuba for decades. In 2009, he voluntarily surrendered to U.S. authorities. Soltren's surrender marked a poignant epilogue to Pan Am Flight 281. The enduring legacy of a hijacking. The hijacking of Pan Am Flight 281, a seemingly isolated incident in the annals of history, reverberated far beyond the tarmac in Havana. It exposed the vulnerabilities of a rapidly evolving aviation industry, forcing airlines and governments to confront the terrifying reality of air piracy. In the wake of this audacious act, security measures were heightened, protocols revised, and a new era of vigilance dawned upon airports worldwide. The once familiar sight of passengers strolling casually onto planes, their bags unchecked, their intentions unquestioned, became a relic of a bygone era. But the legacy of Pan Am Flight 281 extends far beyond the realm of airport security. It serves as a stark reminder of the human capacity for both desperation and resilience, the lengths to which individuals will go to achieve their goals, and the enduring power of hope in the face of adversity. The passengers and crew, forever bound by their shared experience, emerged from the ordeal with a profound appreciation for the fragility of life and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Their story, a testament to the triumph of hope over fear, continues to resonate, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has an uncanny ability to soar above the turbulence.